Deputy Burton, please.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. This is my fourth or fifth time to raise issues around autism directly in the Chamber with the various ministers. And I don't know whether the incidence of autism is on the increase in Ireland or simply that there is more and better and detailed diagnosis. But for parents right around the country, this is an enormous issue, and at the heart of the issues are how children who have ASD, who are on the spectrum, how their education is progressed so that they can maximise their potential, notwithstanding that they may have issues with autism. Now, one of the things that's been brought to my attention is the complete lack of a very clear career path for teachers, many of whom go and train at their own expense in courses and in training relating to dealing with children with autism, but where there is absolutely no recognition of this as a specific stream in terms of education. Now, what has happened when I've raised this as a question is that the Minister for Education passes it to the Teaching Council. The Teaching Council are locked in a very, very tight model where, in fact, they only recognise 4 streams of teaching: primary teaching, secondary teaching, Montessori and other, and then further education. It's a very, very rigid structure. And basically the Minister essentially is washing his hands of this issue because, as you can see, there's no mention there of children with autism or with particular special needs. And as I said, the need at the moment is very intense. In my own constituency, we have a relatively high number of schools, particularly at primary level, but increasingly at secondary level, where children are in ASD classes. We also have at the moment a broad agreement to develop an ASD-specific school in the Dublin 15, Dublin 7, Dublin West area because of the numbers of children effectively only in part-time education at the moment, and in some cases not in education at all. Even the Taoiseach has agreed that there is a need for special provision. But going back to the ASD classes, the issue arises that if teachers are taken out of the general primary teaching stream, for example, at primary level, but they have no specific training, notwithstanding their intense commitment very often to the children, it may not produce the best outcome for children. And this, I think, is an area where, as a society, we're all in the process of learning, and we need to work out how we facilitate appropriate training for people who are going to take up positions as teachers in ASD classes or indeed in ASD-specific schools. And it is really for the Minister for Education to provide leadership in relation to the Teaching Council. I can understand that when the Teaching Council was established, this may have been an area which didn't receive any particular attention. That happens all the time. But now that we know that this is an issue, I think we need to actually address how we are going to provide for recognition for people who have trained in relation to ASD, and how we are going to provide the most appropriate and best education for children who have autism and who have ASD spectrum issues.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Ceann Comhairle, and on behalf of Minister McHugh, I would like to thank the Deputy for raising this matter, and can I also recognise the Deputy's advocacy on behalf of special needs over a long number of years. Inclusive education is a fundamental principle of our educational training system. The principle is put in practice in policies of the Department and the Teaching Council. Under Section 38 of the Teaching Council Act, all initial teacher education programmes in Ireland that lead to registration must have professional accreditation from the Teaching Council. The mandatory requirements for accreditation are set out in the criteria and guidelines for programme providers, and these were published in 2011 and revised again in March 2017. Under the criteria, student teachers in all accredited programmes are required to undertake study in inclusive education, including special education. This applies to all primary and post-primary teachers. The Department published guidelines for schools supporting students with special educational needs for primary and post-primary in 2017. These provide guidance to schools on the use, organisation and the deployment of additional teaching resources for students with special education needs, including students with autism. In addition to developing and reviewing their whole school policies in the education and inclusion of students with special educational needs, schools should also be proactive in meeting the continued professional development needs of their teachers. The National Council for Special Education Support Services delivers a range of professional development initiatives and support for teachers working with students with special educational needs, including autism. Moreover, all of the department's support services, such as the Professional Development Service for Teachers, are required by the department to have a regard to the individual needs of all learners in designing and delivering CPD for teachers. In relation to the school setting, my department's policy is that children with special educational needs, include those with autism, should be included in mainstream placements with additional supports provided, unless such a placement would not be in the best interest or interests of the children with whom they are to be educated. The greater proportion of children with autism attend actually mainstream classes, but some do require the environment of a special class or special school. This decision is based on a recommendation contained within a professional assessment in consultation with the National Council for Special Education. The National Council for Special Education is responsible through its network of special education needs organisers for the development and delivery and a coordination of educational services to children with special educational needs, including the establishment of special class and special school placements. Where parents have been unsuccessful in enrolling their child in a school replacement, they should update their local organiser to inform the planning process.
Minister, Deputy.
I want to thank the Minister for his reply, but the reply, I think, encapsulates the difficulties that happen for many parents and children with the current system. Now, I appreciate that people within the Department of Education and the ministers are trying to improve the situation. But what I want to say to the Minister is the current situation falls down in all sorts of ways right across the country. So, for instance, in recent years, every year, and the Minister will know this from his own constituency, there's a panic when a child can't find a place in a school which will accept the child because they don't, for instance, have a special class or they don't have the resources. The child then, as the Minister said in his reply, has to go to the CNO. And the CNO then is meant to provide the provision. And that doesn't happen either. And very often, as I said in Dublin 15, quite a lot of children are left with only a part-time education or an inadequate education. From the point of view of people who want to teach children who are autistic, who are on the autism spectrum, we really have to recognise that this is a specialised area of teaching and that the current setup of the Teaching Council does not fully recognise this. This is part of the problem. So if a principal teacher in a primary school is allocated, say, an ASD special class, do they just select one of their existing staff to go in and take that? Now, that teacher may be intensely dedicated, may want to do the best, may have voluntarily done courses themselves, but they may not be particularly qualified in the area. And what I'm saying to the Minister is we have to up our game as a country in relation to this, because when the quality of education available to children with autism or on the autism spectrum improves, the outcomes for children and families are really, really good. And what I really want is to have a dialogue with the Minister as to how, as a society, we go about achieving
this. Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Thanks, and it's not difficult to agree with a lot of what you have said. I suppose there are 3 points I should make. Is inclusive education a mandatory element of initial teacher education programme? Yes. Has research been carried out on inclusive education and initial teacher education? Yes, and that's been carried out by the National Council of Special Education. And by the way, it has recently published a report, and it's called Initial Teacher Education for Inclusion. Phase 1 and Phase 2, which is the NCSE report, found that there is, in general, much good practice in schools in relation to attitudes inclusion, while also noting that scope for further alignment between theory and practice, in particular as between the student placement and university experience. Also, can I say to you that the Teaching Council is currently carrying out a review as we speak, of the impact of the current programmes, with a view to amending, if you like, the criteria that you spoke about and guidelines before the next round of accreditation commences in 2020. In the meantime, there are a range of in-service professional supports, development supports, if you like, provided to teachers by the department, and they're in place, and maybe you might not be aware of this, since March 2017. And the National Council for Special Education, the NCSE Support Service, has a remit, if you like, to develop schools' capacity to include students with special educational needs, to promote, if you like, educational provision. But I would say that there is a review being carried out. The review is being carried out on all of the criteria that we spoke about, that I spoke here and that you relayed back to me. And that will be completed before the next round of accreditation, and I would be delighted to keep, as I said, not being condescending to you, I know, but you have been a great advocate for special needs all your life, and I would be delighted to keep you updated with the review, as the department is regularly updated, I think, every fortnight.
Thank you very much. We move to... No, we're finished. We're finished, Deputy. No, we're finished.
Unless they have some qualification. Yeah. And we're talking about, this is a specialist field that we need as a country to organise proper education so that we have qualified people who are also dedicated to the children teaching.
We move to the